Shana Tova again. I want to talk today. That's why I'm not delivering it from the bima itself, but rather just to have a conversation and just to chat. And there's a lot to talk about. What is it that we should talk about? The pandemic, racism in America, the upcoming election and the great divide in our nation. Shall we talk about the rise of anti-Semitism? Shall we talk about interpersonal relationships that have been stunted because of pain and hurt? Truth is, we should talk about them all. We should talk about them all. But we have to be able to talk. And that's really what I want to address today. The idea of us talking to one another and listening to one another. I know this has been a hard time for so many during COVID. So many suffering, so many having challenging times. Our elders who are at home feeling trapped. Parents of young children trying to work full-time and also educate their children. Those who've lost their job. Those people who couldn't be with their loved ones when they died. There's a lot of pain right now. You have to talk. I too am going out of my mind a little bit, to be totally honest with you. My whole essence as a rabbi is to bring people together. And so the fact that I can't is challenging. It kind of hurts my soul. And I'm wrestling with that. It's making me a little nutty. The truth is, my friends, I really miss you. I really miss you. I miss our gathering together. I miss Sunday mornings. I miss Friday nights. I miss being with our staff. I miss visiting you in the hospital even. I really miss you. I have no desire to be an internet rabbi. I never have. But to the credit of our amazing staff, we have indeed become an online community for the time being. They are amazing and deserve much praise. This is my 20th high holidays here at Shir Hamalot. Where did the time go? Rabbis who visit our congregation often will say to me, Rick, you have a very conversational pulpit. There is a conversation always happening between the pulpit and the pew. Like we're always in conversation. Do you know how frustrating it is to speak directly to a camera and not know whether your jokes hit or not? Or your teaching really affected somebody? Or how to speak to an empty sanctuary? It's weird and it's not conversational at all. But I think it's sort of a metaphor for where many of us are globally. We're not really in conversation with each other anymore, and we need to be. I'd like to frame my thoughts today in this way. We are all part of the human race, but my sense, and really my worry, is that people are much more interested in winning the race than they are the humanity behind the race. When I say race, I'm not talking about one thing. I'm talking about everything. From family matters, to work, to relationships, to politics, to yes, race and ethnicity, and even how we drive on the 405. Life can be seen as a race with some false end, or it can be seen as a lived human experience. For even in legitimate races, like in politics or school or athletics, if we lose our humanity in pursuit of winning, then what is the purpose of it all? I really have never seen so much angst or rancor as I do today in all aspects of life. My theory is very simple, and maybe it's naive, but I will stand by it probably until the day I die. If we could just see the humanity in each other, the race would matter less, and the human element would mean so much more. This requires one thing. We need to talk to each other. Judaism is always more interested in the means than in the end. Over the years, I have given sermons that offended people, or even done something that bothered someone, and when they had the courage to call me and voice their concerns, I always ask them out for coffee. Always. I want to learn their point of view. I want to listen. I sometimes want to defend because I'm human too. But more, I want to know that at least at this synagogue, one's human essence is more important to me than anything. I walk away from those encounters hoping that they feel heard. Rabbi Israel Salanter of the 19th century said, "A rabbi whose community does not disagree with him is no rabbi, and a rabbi who fears his community is no man." I understand what Rabbi Salanter is saying here, that a rabbi ought not to be afraid to take a stand. While I agree wholeheartedly with that, I just take a slightly nuanced approach to his words. I invest in relationships, and I believe that when relationships are solid, people can talk about anything, even tough things. But lately I really wonder. It feels that whether on social media, in politics, or even in polite talk, it's much more about winning some perceived race than it is the human being behind the human race. Do the relationships matter? Do they matter? If somebody says something to you or feels something different than you feel, and you have a long-term relationship with them, doesn't the relationship count for something, even if you disagree? Today we read from the book of creation, and there are beautiful midrashim legends about the creation of the human being, that we all derived from that person, that human being named Adam. And why? So that no one person could say that my father is greater than yours, or my background is better than yours. No, we all come from the same background. And our Judaism is replete with these beautiful sentiments. But the first chapters of the Torah belie a different story. We're not in the fourth chapter of the book of Genesis. We have only 4 people alive, and one kills the other. Cain kills his brother Abel. We get to chapter 6 in the story of Noah, and God is so fed up with the way people are behaving that God destroys the whole earth. We get to chapter 11, and the people want to build a tower. Seems okay on the face of it, but how do they build the tower? They climb over each other. They throw bricks upon one another. And God finally says, no more, confounds their language to 70 different languages. It's known as the Tower of Babel, not the proudest moment for humanity. The goal was good to do something together, but in the end, they didn't talk to each other, and they were more interested in the end than in the process, the human beings that were helping them build that tower. In other words, humanity at that time was much more interested in winning the race than in being part of the human race. Here's what I know from my 25 years of being a rabbi. The human race has a lot more in common with each other than we ever acknowledge. A person might be of one political party or another, or be of a different culture or ethnicity, but all parties still have children who might struggle. They all still have parents who are aging and need more help. They all still need to make a living. They still worry when their teenagers go out at night. I promise you, the humanity of each person is not too dissimilar to every other person. Our needs and our wants are much more connected spiritually than we give credit for. We should honor that similarity as a basis from which to have conversations. I have buried too many people in my life without them having taken or sought the opportunity to reconcile simply by talking with those they hurt or those who hurt them. It's heartbreaking to me to be at a funeral where I know one adult child isn't there, not because of necessarily the issues at hand they had with their parent, but because it was too hard to talk about the issues. And if they talked about the issues, they might have been able to resolve them. And in the end, if they talked about it and couldn't resolve the issues, then so be it. But at least they had the conversation and honored one another's humanity. They had to talk, and they didn't. It was left unsaid, as opposed to talking with respect for each person's essence. We need to talk more. We need to invest more in the human part of the human race, much more than the race itself. Believe it or not, I was a pretty good tennis player when I was in high school. Really, I was. Don't laugh. I really was. Freshman year, I played doubles, and my junior year, I played doubles, but my sophomore year, I was number one on the tennis team in singles. And my coach, Mr. Hibson, he said, "Steinberg, you got hustle. You don't have great skills, but you got hustle." But what would happen is, as the season went on, is I would be ahead maybe 5 games to 0. But then I'd end up losing 7-5. Well, I felt badly for the guy who was my opponent, and so I let up a little bit, but he did not let up, and then he would beat me. And the coach would say to me, he'd say, "Steinberg, you need to have a killer instinct. You don't have a killer instinct." And I'd say, "Okay, I'll try and be a little more killer." But it wasn't in me. I guess it's a good thing I'm a rabbi. I do want to say, though, that Judaism is pro-winning the race, but not at all costs. It is how we run the race. It's how we spend our time to achieve our goals that Judaism is most interested in. We are pro-achievement in every single way, as long as we get there in the right way. I'm worried, my friends. I'm worried about the example we're setting for our children. I'm worried about the transactional nature of things. I'm worried because it's not relational. People aren't talking, and we really, really need to talk more. As your rabbi, as a fellow Jew in this community, as a human being, I want to tell you something. I love you. I really love you. I love your humanity. Of course, it's easy to love those with whom you agree. But think of your family. My guess is that you don't all agree on everything, but you still find a way to manage to love most of the time. Love is so important. For when we talk, it creates bonds of respect and it honors the other's humanity. For the High Holy Days, which is all about relationships, I want to suggest the talking stick to you. It's a very simple thing, and most of you might be familiar with it. But if you are in conversation with somebody, you're having a battle and not really listening to each other, you take a stick, you can take a spoon, you can take anything you want, and the person holding the item is the only one who gets to talk. When that person is finished, the other person gets the talking stick, and they get to talk, and you cannot interrupt them, even if their words are making your blood boil. It's an exercise that's actually much more difficult than it sounds, but I would really encourage you to do it. It's a way to get us talking with one another. And even if we disagree 100% with what the other person is saying, at least they will feel heard, and you will feel heard. And that's the beginning of communication. For imagine if our world was filled with people who started with the premise that we each loved one another's basic humanity, and then talk to each other with that as our baseline. I don't mean to suggest for a moment that there isn't evil in the world. Please don't misunderstand me. That there aren't people in the world for whom talking would matter not one single bit. We must speak out loudly and clearly. We must not be indifferent to hate and evil. We must advocate for policies we believe in. We must hold people accountable, and we must never, ever be indifferent to lawlessness and violence and things that would bring down our community or even ourselves. That being said, I don't believe that everyone who disagrees with me is evil or even wrong. They just feel differently than I do. Yes, there are bad people in the world, but not as many people as we think. Not everyone is a demon or out to get us. Talk to people, and you will see their humanity more than the wrongs we perceive in them. And they will do the same for you. I am convinced that if we talked more, there would be less suffering in the world. If we honored one another's humanity, there would be less war. Maybe naive, but that's the way peace treaties are made, when two parties decide to talk with one another. A famous Israeli once said, "We don't make peace with our friends, we make peace with our enemies." That's an important concept for talking to one another. But I'm not just talking about nations when I speak of war. What I'm talking about is families breaking up. Not so much over any particular issue, but because they can't sit down and talk to each other. The issues are important, and we ought to stand tough on the positions we feel strongly about and advocate them. But just because someone feels different doesn't make them less human or less worthy of you listening to them. I want to institute a new game whenever you're on Zoom. That anytime we're on a Zoom call and we can't hear you, you're on mute, you have to put $1 in the tzedakah box. You'll get $5 a meeting at least, I promise you. Think if you had the power to mute people. Would you? You know what that would produce? The only voice you would hear is your own. And that is no way to grow, to live, or to be. In the end, that person becomes a community of one. Nothing is more antithetical to Judaism, as Rabbi Ziv said last night, than silence or a community of one. In fact, the whole essence of our faith is based in conversation, not with those with whom you agree, but with those you disagree. Just read the Talmud. When people talk, discuss, argue over issues, over Torah, or anything, as long as it is respectful, the Talmud tells us that it is for the sake of heaven. The high holy days are about having tough conversations with each other, about where we have gone astray in our relationships. The whole premise, my friends, of the high holy days is that God forgives for sins against God. But for sins against one person to another, you actually have to talk to that person and ask for forgiveness, and they have to then grant it to you. It requires a conversation. If we want to practice our Judaism, let's begin there. I want to take this time to apologize publicly to anyone I offended this year. If I did not realize it, please reach out to me so that I can discuss it with you, go for coffee with you, and apologize in person. We can even use the talking stick if you'd like. What I want for our temple family is to have conversations and to be able to discuss the joys of life and not to be afraid to discuss the oys of life. This year, we have a new program called Influencers and Inspirers. It's interviews with local and national leaders across the spectrum, some with whom you'll agree and some with whom you'll disagree. But I encourage you to listen with an open mind and reach out to me afterwards so we can talk about it. Temple should be a safe place for any two people to talk about anything, their struggles, their pain, their sufferings, and their feelings and opinions about anything they wish, just as long as the others provided the same opportunity. 20 years. We've come a very long way. From a temple of 280 families to well over 600 families is a statistic to be proud of. But what I'm most proud of is that I hope our temple is as warm and loving as it has always been. That we celebrate one another's humanity and that we truly love each other. I have to tell you, as hard as COVID-19 quarantine has been for us, we have had so many mitzvahs happening here at Temple. I see people checking up on each other in ways we never did before. I have people calling me wishing to donate to help families in need. I see people in need deeply touched by the generosity of our synagogue. Young and old working together, near and far, right and left, doing mitzvahs to improve the human race. We have so much more to do as a temple. I want us to keep on talking to each other. Yes, we have a goal of getting to 700 families, and that would be terrific. But the focus is not on the race, but on the human part, each individual. If we keep our eye on the human part, We will always win the race, for it is God holding the checkered flag as God writes us into the book of life this year and every year. Amen. Shana Tova.